Thank you very much for having me. I'm honoured to be here in the slot where everyone's falling asleep, and I'm going to hit you hard with the technical migrations. But we'll try and make it engaging as possible. So I'm sure we've all seen our fair share of technical migrations in our careers, some no doubt more successful than others. And if you've ever struggled with a technical migration, I'm here to tell you that you're not alone, because migrations are really hard. And it's really easy to start out thinking that it's going to be a straight line to the end where everything is going to be better right away. But in reality, it's often a lot more like this: an uphill path full of twists and turns and nasty surprises. Unforeseen hiccups and bends in the road, interruptions that take away your focus, and what seems like a seemingly short distance that takes quite a lot longer than you might expect. And I'm going to talk to you about the bends in the road that we faced embarking on a big technical migration at Monzo, how we navigated them, and some of the lessons that we faced along the way. And also how to know whether you should be going down this road at all. My name is Sophie. I'm a senior web developer and web discipline lead at Monzo. I have a website where I occasionally write about tech things, mostly just share recipes I like. And you can find me in various places around the internet. And Monzo is the hot coral bank that lives on your phone. We make managing money easy, and also we have slightly unhinged marketing. We also have web things as well, though. We're famous for our web apps, right? But our mobile apps. But we do have a suite of web apps. Monzo.com is one of them. This is our marketing website where you can see product information, help articles, that kind of thing. We've also got a web banking app for our business customers where you can view your transactions, manage your pots, you can make payments, and also create payment links that allow you to get paid. And we have a suite of internal tools as well, the largest of which is called BizOps. And this is our customer service system. So things like chat, email, and calls all go through this system. Anything that you need to help customers basically is done through this system. And as you can imagine, it's very complex. We recently migrated our web properties to TypeScript, and it took a really long time. This is actually the sticker that we got made after we finished. It actually took us just over 2 years, but it did come out pretty well in the end. But needless to say, migrations are not without challenge, especially in an organization of our size. Before TypeScript, we were using Flow, which is Facebook's type system. But TypeScript became a lot more popular, and it got to the point where nobody was writing flow types for the libraries that we were using, and it became really hard to keep things up to date. And on top of that, the Flow server just crashed constantly. We use Next.js for our sins, and we had to use the Babel compiler because Flow requires Babel to transpile it. And when Next released some super speedy Rust-based compiler, we were stuck using Babel. And it was something we talked about on and off for a while, along the lines of, yeah, we should probably do this at some point. You know, it was getting really hard to upgrade some of our important libraries. But we knew that migrating our web properties to TypeScript wouldn't be as simple as just running a code mod across the whole repo, because for one thing, there was just so much code. And it can seem really intimidating when you're right at the beginning and you feel like you've got this massive job ahead of you. Where do you even start? In our case, we started small. So a couple of our web engineers just had a look to see what was out there on GitHub, found some existing scripts and tried them out, the little side project. So they had a hack to see if they could migrate one library. And then when they migrated it, they had a go to see if they could get it building alongside all of the rest of our code. Now, Flow to TypeScript is a path very well trodden at this point. And in fact, a while after we started, Stripe open sourced their Flow to TypeScript migration code. And with any technical migration, it's always worth seeing what other people have been up to, so you can see if you can save yourself a bit of time. You want to prove that this migration can work before you commit yourself to doing anything else, because if you try and get buy-in before you've even started looking into a solution, you run the risk of being shut down before you've been able to do anything. And without a really clearly defined plan or timeline, you're basically asking people with very little context to let you focus on what they might see as a less important piece, maintenance piece, over prioritized teamwork. And so it's really important to have that space to experiment with something before you need to go and make a case for it. Time box the exploration effort and communicate your progress really clearly, and keep a log of any decisions that led to you choosing a particular path or technology, because someone in the future will thank you for it, whether that's someone doing something similar further down the line or you trying to figure out what the hell you were thinking in 3 months' time. Speaking of which, document the hell out of everything right from the start. For every new engineer who joins your team, you're going to want to get them up to speed with what you're doing and why you're doing it and how they can get involved. I actually left Monzo in 2021 and I came back in mid-2022. That's a story for the pub. But I needed to get up to speed with the TypeScript migration, because when I left, it was kind of in the very early stages. And by the time I came back, it was in full swing. So the team put together this dedicated Notion space, which had all the information you could possibly need about why we were doing it, what we were doing, and how we were tracking our progress. Your documentation should cover every aspect of the migration, past, present, and future. Treat it like a project, because of course you're all documenting your projects very thoroughly, I assume. But you need to make it easy for somebody with no context to get up to speed very quickly with the what, the how, the who. So once you've decided to actually go ahead, who actually does the work? Should you do it with one team working on the migration, or should you split it across multiple teams? In an ideal world, you'd have one team who laser focus on the migration and nothing else. And this massively reduces the risk of not getting it done. But we don't always live in an ideal world, right? Sharing the work across multiple teams does remove the need to ring fence a team for the duration of the migration, but it also takes a lot longer. And you're at the mercy of other teams' planning cycles, and ultimately this work is never going to take priority over what they've got prioritized on their roadmaps. And the bigger your organization gets, the more complicated this becomes. If you're driving the migration centrally, you can just do it for them. So we weren't able to have one team doing the migration, so we went for something in the middle. And so we centralized the work amongst our web engineers, because there were lots of different product teams and not all of them have web engineers, and they did it as a side project. And so we shared it across the web discipline, starting with a small group, and we figured, yes, it would probably take a while. And so how should you tackle the work itself? Should you do it all at once, or should you do it bit by bit? When you're doing the work shared across multiple teams like we were, you don't really have a choice, right? You have to do it incrementally. But if you do have the luxury of a dedicated team doing the migration, you do have a choice there. Some things do lend themselves well to doing all at once. So some things like major version upgrades of packages, you can't always have more than one version running at the same time. If you're, say, replatforming onto a new static site generator, you might just want to get it over with and not faff around with multiple build steps. If your code base is fairly small, then the risk is fairly low. But if you do have a bigger code base like us, then sure, a big bang migration might be quicker, but it is inherently riskier. Because if there's an incident, it makes it a lot easier to identify what went wrong and roll back when you've only migrated a little bit at a time. It's a much, much safer approach. So we have a monorepo. All of our apps use React and some use Next. It's probably Ryan's nightmare. Previously, everything was on Flow. And we have some shared libraries across the monorepo, and changes to those libraries can affect multiple apps and multiple parts of the same app. And we knew that we couldn't afford to migrate the entire customer service app and just yeet it into production when our ability to service our customers depends on that app being up. So we knew we'd have to be extremely diligent and really careful with our changes. The flip side of this approach is that you have to be really disciplined and make sure that you actually keep going, because it can be really challenging to maintain enthusiasm and pace, as we discovered. And there's a real risk that you go bit by bit and something else comes up and you have to pause it and you're going to come back to it later, but actually you never do. Of course, like with any migration, we hit a bend in the road pretty soon. A lot of our contributors to our repo are backend engineers from other parts of the company. And we found that when contributing, people would copy and paste old Flow code to create new packages, increasing the amount of Flow in our code base when we're actually trying to get that number down. And we needed to make it much, much easier to build stuff in TypeScript. So easy that you'd never do any other way. And we did that with tooling. We wrote a package generator that would bootstrap a TypeScript library or component with everything that you could need. And this removed a lot of the manual steps that engineers were struggling with, and all the new things coming in were TypeScript. We could have also added some static checks here. So something like semgrep is a great tool. So you can detect new files that have stuff in that you don't want, and then you can make that fail your continuous integration and block that being merged in. For things like deprecated libraries, you might want to use something like ESLint, which allows you to warn or error against people importing things that they shouldn't. I can't overstate the importance of tooling here, right? If we'd done this all manually, it would have taken twice as long. So that script that we wrote at the beginning to migrate something to TypeScript became our migration script. So a few iterations later, and we could migrate either an entire package or just a directory within that package, and then build it all together. And so after running the script, we'd give the output a manual pass afterwards to fix any type problems and any errors that came up. And because they are good people, the authors of the script documented it meticulously. And we had space as well for documenting any issues that people had come across and any fixes for those as well. The scripts also generated flow types for those packages that we'd just migrated, so that any other apps that still depended on them that were in flow would still have types for those imported packages. Now, the monorepo, with all its shared libraries, a lot of those shared libraries have transitive dependencies on other shared libraries. So we didn't want to be in the position where we migrated a library to TypeScript and find that it still depended on other libraries that were still in flow. So we wrote another script, there's a theme here, that would find packages that were ready to migrate because all of their dependencies had already been migrated. And then that gradually unlocked packages further down the tree. Especially with an incremental migration like this, it became really, really important to measure our progress, not only to keep morale up, but also that we could see how close we were to actually finishing. I put together a dashboard that showed the number of flow packages in the repo versus the number of TypeScript packages, and it was a very exciting day when those lines finally crossed over. And we'd like emit these metrics every time we merge code in. I wrote another script that piggybacked off which packages are ready to migrate script, and that would give me the percentage of files that had been migrated. And I posted this every month on Slack. And towards the end, I was posting it every time the percentage changed as well, just to get people excited about TypeScript. I need to get out more. So along with that measurement, you also need milestones, which are checkpoints along the way that indicate significant achievements in the migration. And setting milestones not only made us feel like we were getting somewhere, but it also helped us to communicate our progress to stakeholders in terms that they could easily understand. So the first library that we migrated was a milestone. The first app was another. Migrating our business banking web app was another one. And migrating BizOps, the biggest app in our repository, was the final one. And if you're not setting milestones like these for projects, you really, really, really should be, because it really helps to break down a massive project into these easily digestible chunks. Another bend in the road showed up around mid-2023. And by this point, we had the whole web discipline working on the migration as a side project, but we were still quite a long way from the end. And we'd hoped to get it done by the end of 2023, but it really wasn't looking likely. And at Monzo, we tried to foster an environment where you have like your squad work, but you also have web discipline work, and you have the freedom over your calendar and your week to fit that in and move and plan around it. But teams have external deadlines. There can be times when you feel like you don't have the capacity to focus on other stuff, and things can be quite hard to prioritize. So either way, things were moving slowly, and there was a risk we just wouldn't finish it at all. And we'd been roughly aiming for the end of 2023, but with the support of my engineering director, I turned this into a hard deadline. We had to get it finished by the end of the year so we could be done with it and move on. We ticketed up the remaining work, broke down the biggest apps into tickets, which were then assigned to teams based on code ownership and team size. And then I got buy-in from the engineering managers and the tech leads of those teams with web engineers in to make sure they brought those tickets into their planning. And every month I counted up the tickets remaining for each team and posted an update with our progress and made sure to celebrate the teams who migrated the most that month, and of course gave the percentage. We also reduced the scope of the migration a bit, so we wouldn't have to migrate every single app to consider it done, only the ones that we worked on most. And this meant that there would be a few apps left in flow at the end, but they rarely get touched and people could just migrate them as and when they needed to. We did just think, should we just strip out Flow completely? Like, if it's just JavaScript, we don't need any transpilers. But then we realized we'd probably need to run some kind of code mod to get rid of all the Flow, and then we'd have to check that for errors. So we might as well just migrate it to TypeScript. We didn't have to get explicit buy-in for quite a long time because, as I mentioned, there is this expectation at Monzo that there is web discipline work to be done. And for a long while, it was just a small group of people doing bits here and there, but it became really important to get buy-in later on in the project once it was obvious that things were moving slowly, and we'd already proven the potential value by that point. And without the backing of senior stakeholders, there really was a risk the work wouldn't be deemed enough to actually finish. And my eng director was a great support here. With his backing, other less technical leaders in the organization were much more likely to support us. And we brought managers and leadership on board by clearly articulating the problems that we were having now and the benefits we were expecting at the end. And I made it really clear that we wouldn't see the majority of these benefits until we'd actually finished, things like compile time improvement. And it definitely helps if you know what stakeholders care the most about. And some of them are going to be really focused on risk, right? What's the danger if you don't do the migration? Others may be more focused on cost or developer velocity, right? Is being on an old technology holding you back and making you less likely to ship things? Or is it making you unable to scale? Know who you're pitching to and tailor your argument accordingly. Stakeholders will also want to know when you'll see the benefits from all of this hard work. And with some migrations, it's 0 to 1, and you don't see the value until it's completely done. And these are often a lot harder to make a case for, but you need to do them anyway. But for a lot of the TypeScript stuff, that was the case. As I said, we could migrate 99% of our files to TypeScript, but as long as there was any flow left in the app, we'd still be stuck using Babel to compile it. But there was actually a small amount of incremental value in being able to upgrade to TypeScript. So everything new that we worked on could be in TypeScript. The documentation was better, our IDEs worked a bit faster, and we were able to upgrade some of our packages a bit sooner than we thought we would. In my opinion, the greatest threat to any migration is not complexity, it's actually changing priorities that mean that you can't finish it. And it's really important that you make sure the powers that be understand the risks of not completing the migration. It's very easy to think that you can just pause it and carry on with your lives, but in some cases, you're going to end up in a worse position than you were before you started. At this point, I'm contractually obliged to include this XKCD comic about standards. You may introduce one new technology to replace everything, but if you don't finish, it's just another new technology on the pile. Maybe you'll do a little bit, and then you'll need to focus on something else. Then someone else will come along and they'll add another new technology. And maybe you've got a lot of different teams working on a lot of different parts of a website, and you're all using slightly different approaches and different libraries. It's also very common after mergers and takeovers when other companies' systems and code bases get subsumed into the parent companies. So Steph was talking about that earlier. You end up with a lot of different tech stacks. When there are 5 different ways of doing the same thing in your code base, how is an engineer supposed to know which one is the right one? And what is their motivation to update the old stuff and replace it with the new stuff if there's still a ton of the old stuff and making changes to the old stuff is a lot quicker? And if someone is paged for an incident in the middle of the night, and this particular piece of your website uses some obscure data fetching technology, when the rest of the website just uses browser native APIs, like, what are they going to do? And finally, think about the end user. By adding another library into your code base, are you increasing the bundle size that the user has to download on the other end? You're also much more likely to get buy-in for a migration if you prove you've given a lot of thought to safety, minimizing disruption to operations, not inconveniencing people too much, and having an escape plan. Because any migration comes with risk, the important thing is how you deal with that risk and prepare yourself for what can go wrong. Now, type system migrations are fairly low risk as they go, especially as we were moving incrementally. But, it's not to say it went perfectly smoothly. But for the next section, I've drawn some inspiration from other migrations that we've done recently that have carried with them a bit of a higher risk. At Monzo, we have a value, be hard on problems, not people, which I really like. And ultimately, incidents are an inevitable consequence of doing stuff, moving forward. Accept that you will probably have some incidents when you're migrating things. That is fine. It's nobody's fault. The important thing is that you can recover from them really quickly and really safely and learn from them so they don't happen again. And we almost certainly had some bugs and minor incidents that arose from migrating some of our components to TypeScript. But we were able to really quickly roll them back, fix them, and move forward again. It might be appropriate to establish a set of guardrails, which are points at which you won't be happy anymore and you'll decide to roll back. For example, if you're migrating your website to a new platform or something, you might want to monitor performance and load times and say, okay, if load times consistently exceed X on the new platform, we're going to roll back. And you should make sure you have the same metrics across the old and new systems as well, so that you can accurately compare them. So maybe some Grafana dashboards or something like that that can give you an idea of how things are looking across both implementations. So we recently migrated our customer support call tooling to a more modern platform. And we had two dashboards side by side that showed answer rate, queue length, and the percentage of agents on a call. And we knew that if we had vastly different results across those two systems, then something was horribly wrong. And we set alarms on those metrics as well. So you don't want to sit there staring at dashboards all day long. You want to be alerted if something is going wrong, right? So we worked with operations folks to understand what are acceptable thresholds for these graphs, and at what point do we need to be alerted if something has dipped below that amount. And if you do hit one of those guardrails and you make the decision to roll back, you need to make sure that you've got a really well-documented step-by-step plan to do that as well. And anyone should be able to follow this plan, not just you, especially if they're paged in the middle of the night. So with the TypeScript migration, we didn't actually have a rollback plan, but there was no going back for us because we'd kind of assessed that there was negligible impact on having Flow and TypeScript in the same code base, and we didn't foresee a situation where things were so bad that we had to roll back. Ultimately, it just compiles down to JavaScript in the end. But other migrations have a lot more at stake. So my colleague Sahil works in our infrastructure team, and he spoke at Staff Plus conference last year about some of the migrations that our platform teams have done. And these migrations touch the services that literally power the entire bank. And when critical functionality is in the hot path for your migration, you really need to make sure there's a clearly defined escape plan if things go wrong. And this might be a full rollback or a partial rollback to a state that you know is safe. And there's going to come a point where it's no longer safe or possible to roll back. And ideally, this should become close to the end of your migration. So with the support call system, the other day, we moved the phone numbers over that you have on the back of your Monzo card. They're now pointing to our new system. Before they were pointing to the old system, and then we had a redirect in place while we rolled out the new system. So we can't roll back now, but we've tested it thoroughly, and we know that it's working really well. To make sure these points of no return are also well documented, as it can be quite destructive if somebody tries to roll something back when you've already gone past that point. And when you do roll things out, make sure you're doing that as safely as possible. If you can, test your migration procedures on a less important thing, like a service or app or library that no one really uses. I think the thing that we migrated first, right at the beginning, was like some little handlebars parser that was used in like one place. If you're rolling out something that handles traffic, you might want to run it in shadow mode, which is where you have an old system that handles all of your traffic just as normal, and you roll out the new system in a kind of dry run mode. So it's still handling traffic, but the outcome of the traffic that it's processing isn't really doing anything. It's all still going through the old system. But you can monitor the output of the new system to check that it matches what you expect. We also ran a pilot for our support call migration where we worked with a small percentage of our customer service agents. We needed to control variables like how many calls we were routing to them to make sure it was proportional. And working with the pilot made sure that we could get really fast feedback and pick up any bugs as soon as they were spotted. Like growing out a fringe, there's going to be a really awkward in-between phase where you have both the old and the new technologies alongside each other, and you're going to have to maintain and make changes to both. And you might have to accept some temporary slowdowns in processes, such as additional build steps. We had to run both the Flow and TypeScript compilers in the build process throughout the migration. And while it was negligible, as I said, it did add a couple of seconds onto each build. But keep on trucking, and eventually you'll get to the point where you can remove the old system. And we did it. In December last year, I was running the migration stat script more frequently to see the number ticking up, like 97, 98, 99. And I PR'd a change before Christmas that was just the remaining flow files in the main BizOps app. And when I came back from my Christmas break in January, I removed Babel from BizOps to see what would happen, expecting it would fall over because we'd forgotten something, but it just worked, which is still highly suspicious. And the results have been great, right? So the new compiler is faster in both dev and CI. We were able to upgrade those libraries sooner. Concerningly, we fixed a lot of type errors during that migration, missing props and parameters that Flow had just ignored, but they're now all sorted out. And our IDEs are much faster. So a lot of us use VS Code, which is like TypeScript native. So that's very nice, and no more crashing servers as well. And when you do finish, make sure you celebrate it. And it's not an easy task to do a migration. It can take a really long time, as we discovered. So make sure you recognize everyone who contributed and saw it through with you. Post messages in public forums, embarrass people. This one was in our company-wide engineering announcements channel. Make sure engineering leadership know what you've all achieved. Get stickers made. Everyone loves a sticker. We also had a little party where I ordered some little cupcakes with TypeScript cake toppers. And that's our story of how we migrated to TypeScript. Now I'm going to talk about yours, not your story of how you migrate to TypeScript. But next time a migration opportunity presents itself, here are some things that you can think about before you take the leap. Do you even need to do this migration at all? That should always be the first question you should ask yourself. As time goes on, will you be in the same place or a worse place? Because if you're going to be in a worse place, then sure, you probably need to do something. But if you're going to be in the same place if you don't do anything, it's definitely something that requires a bit more thought. The decision to introduce a new technology needs to be really, really well considered. You need to have a really clear idea of the benefits you're expecting, because all benefits are relative to the amount of effort required to actually get there. How much do you value that benefit in relation to the number of developer hours required to do the migration? And is there a point at which the effort outweighs the value? And this gets more of an issue the larger your code base gets and the more complex your organizational needs are. Now, for TypeScript, compilation time was a really nice bonus, but really we knew we couldn't afford to be stuck on an obsolete type system, right? It did take us a long time to get there, but it's going to continue to be worth it every time we can upgrade an important package because there are TypeScript types for it. And remember that technology is not free once you've implemented it. There is maintenance to think about. Who's going to look after the new technology, right? This includes staying on top of vulnerabilities, being on call, if that's relevant, major version upgrades, and also debugging when things go wrong. And they will go wrong. Don't think you can just hand it over to an infrastructure or a platform team to just look after it, because it might be completely different from their tech stack. And does more than one person in your organization know how this technology works? If you left tomorrow, would there be anyone around who knew how to pick up when you left off? And are the other engineers in the company ready to change their ways of working? Do they reasonably have time to learn how to use this new technology? If you're thinking of introducing something like GraphQL, that's a massive paradigm shift in the way that you design and build your APIs. And you've got to completely rethink the structure of your backend. And if you're not careful, your engineers are just going to end up building REST in GraphQL. And will you even be able to hire people to use this new technology if it's really that obscure? If you started afresh today and you chose this new technology to build your code base in, you know you're going to be going through exactly the same thing a few years down the line, because there are always going to be new technologies in the same way that all code is legacy as soon as it's merged into main. You don't have to do a new migration every time something new comes out. Think really carefully about your motivations. And there's a vast difference between picking a new tool because it seems cool and picking it because it's genuinely going to be better. Many of us have built workarounds and complex functionality that have been superseded by newer libraries and tools. I can think of the horrible things I've done with JavaScript just to make a dialogue, and now we have that natively in a browser, and it's wonderful. Things become end of life as well, right? We might put off major version upgrades of things because we're intimidated by the amount of work required, but it does become a necessity at the point at which the library is not going to be updated anymore, and you're at risk of critical security vulnerabilities not being patched. And things that seem like a good idea at the time might end up being a poor decision. Have you ended up with the technological equivalent of HD DVD in your code base? For the uninitiated, HD DVD was the competitor to Blu-ray. And Blu-ray won the war of the standards and HD DVD disappeared, never to be seen again. If you had an Xbox 360, you had an HD DVD player, but I bet you didn't even know that. So many of us will have bet on the wrong horse when it comes to technology decisions. And for us, Flow was our HD DVD. We made a choice in the past. It turned out not to have been the right one. We certainly weren't the only ones to have made that choice. And at the time, it did make a lot of sense. These things happen. It's no one's fault. And sometimes a library or technology will be deprecated in favor of another. And as we found, that can leave you as a disadvantage when it comes to upgrading things or taking advantage of advances in technology. As well as a load of good reasons, there are also quite a lot of bad reasons to do a migration as well. Sometimes companies migrate to new technologies because it seems like that's what the industry is doing now. And don't assume that just because a well-respected company is using a particular technology that you should too. When everyone was adopting React, I do wonder how many of them stopped to think about whether they really needed something that was built for a Facebook scale application. You know, we use it internally at Monzo for our customer service application, but that is massive and really complex with loads of people contributing. And I actually think it makes sense. But for a static page, like how much of it is just excess JavaScript that you're sending down the wire, right? And can you achieve the same effects with a static site generator? Maybe you joined a new company or you came onto a new project where they're using a technology or library that you either aren't familiar with or you just don't like. I was given some good advice by my boss at a new company once when I said I didn't like a library that they'd chosen. He said, think about whether it's actually worse or just different. And that's really good advice, you know. Live with it for a few weeks, months, whatever, and just think, is it different from what you're used to? In my case, I think it was actually worse, and I was right. But the principle is a good one, right? So is it actually worse, or are you just not used to it? And by not opening your mind to different technologies from the ones you're used to, are you holding yourself and your work back? And even if the thing that you would have used is better, does it really make sense to migrate at this point, right? Have you got a plan for how you're going to get there? And if you're working for a startup who are struggling to get product market fit and are just like, you know, default dead as startups generally are, does it even make sense for you to implement this new technology right now? Or should you just stick with what it is, put up with it? Maybe there's a new language you've been playing with in your spare time and you wish you could use it all the time. Or there's a massive hype around a new technology and it seems like it would be good for some reason or another. There are so many new libraries and frameworks out there and it is exhausting trying to keep up. And many of these new technologies are going to come and go before you've even had a chance to try them out. It's really, really important to consider whether a new technology is actually better than what you've got now. There's nothing wrong with boring. Boring works. Boring is tried and tested, and boring is easier to maintain. This is an excerpt from Choose Boring Technology by Dan McKinley, and you can read it online at boringtechnology.club, and you should and must, and please go and do it now. Boring should not be conflated with bad. There is technology out there that is both boring and bad. You should not use any of that. But there are many choices of technology that are boring and good, or at least good enough. MySQL is boring. Postgres is boring. PHP is boring. Python is boring. Memcached is boring. Cron is boring. These technologies, boring as they are familiar and reliable, and people know how to use them. And there's lots of documentation, and they're really well maintained. And sure, they're not new and exciting, but they will work, and they'll do what you need them to do. So use them. I hope these lessons will give you a framework to tackle your next migration. Whether you're a big company or a little small agency, we all have very similar challenges with migrations. And next time you do a migration, do it wisely, plan it really well, document it, and don't be afraid to be boring. And maybe you don't even need to do it at all. Thank you very much.